Chat. This is Kenneth Wong, Senior Editor for DE 24/7, and I usually go to trade shows and collect newsworthy tidbits. And I also have with me my colleague Brian. Brian, self-introduction, please.
Hi, this is Brian Albright, Editorial Director at Digital Engineering Magazine.
Let's start with what has been making news in the headline, and that is an acquisition. We've been reading that Nano Dimension, a company, has made actually two unsolicited offer to acquire Stratasys. The first offer was made near the end of March. Nano Dimension made an unsolicited offer for $18 per share to acquire the remaining shares of Stratasys. They already own about 14%, so this is an offer to buy out the rest of the share. It was rejected by Stratasys, saying that they want to be independent and they are confident that they can do better on their own. So the latest round is that Nano offered another offer for $20 per share. This offer is still outstanding, and we haven't heard anything from Stratasys yet. What are your thoughts on that, Brian?
Well, this has been interesting because Nano Dimension is a relatively newer company compared to Stratasys, who's been around quite a while. And Nano also, I think has sort of less of a presence in the market comparatively, just because Stratasys is one of the original companies in the additive space. But it's been a little peculiar, especially in the context of Nano Dimension having the sort of battle within their own board of directors and among their shareholders about over control of the company, and that's been happening sort of simultaneously with this bid to purchase Stratasys, who's clearly not interested. So it's a little peculiar, and I'll be interested to see where it goes.
Yeah, that's right. I reported on the acquisition offers and the responses from Stratasys, but at the same time, there is another aspect as well, because Nano Dimensions seems to be having some sort of conflict with it's one of its biggest institutional shareholders. I don't know where that is going to go, but so far as Stratasys acquisition is going, the latest offer is outstanding, and it's an increase um, amount to buy out the remaining amount of the share. But like you pointed out, yeah, Nano was founded in 2012. So by tech life cycle, it's a relatively new company. Stratasys was founded in 1989. It's a much
Right.
longer, much well-established company. Um, the chairman and CEO of Nano Dimension has been talking quite a bit on his YouTube channel. Um, Yao Yuaf Stern. I hope that I'm not I hope that I'm not mispronouncing his name. Anyway, Mr. Stern seems to believe that Nano Dimension has different materials other than polymer. On the other hand, Stratus is focused primarily on polymer. So his justification is, why don't we combine the two so that we can cover a much wider range of materials and technologies that we can offer to the customers. I must say, I see some logic in that argument. And your thoughts, Brian?
I think that is true. I think just the if you just look at it on paper, the idea of the two companies combining, that would probably make sense. The scenario in which it's unfolding is what seems to be kind of peculiar about this whole thing. And I'll point out that Stratasys, and as you pointed out in your coverage online too, that, Stratasys has adopted sort of a poison pill um, option to prevent the type of shareholder takeover that might otherwise be happening too. So they have some sort of defense against this other than just saying no. So I guess we'll just try to see how it plays out, and we are getting, as you pointed out from Nano Dimension, he's putting out a video once, sometimes twice a week, both about this and also about their own sort of internal strife when it comes to shareholders.
When I reach out to Terry Ola, who is a very well-respected, of course, industry watcher for the additive manufacturing or 3D printing industry, He said that if the deal goes through, it would go down as one of the largest and most unexpected acquisition for the AM industry. So far it hasn't happened yet, but it did. The offer did indeed catch many of us by surprise. But the latest twist to that, I just found out this morning as I'm doing research before we went into recording, is that Stratasys actually on the 5th of April completed an acquisition of a German company called uh, Investo, which is specializing in a variety of polyurethane and polycarbonate materials, AM material specialist. So a lot of things are happening simultaneously, it seems, in those two companies.
Right.
Moving on to one of the conferences that I recently attended, and that's OzenCon. It is held by ANSYS reseller Ozen Engineering, and it's right there in the heart of Silicon Valley in Santa Clara. I went there, and the keynote speaker turns out to be the CTO of ANSYS, Dr. Prith Panaji. Now, he has a lot to say about the impact of chatbots like ChatGPT. So let's hear what he has to say.
Today, when you use a simulation tool such as HFSS for electromagnetic simulation or Fluent for fluid simulation, a user has to set like 100 different parameters, and you have to almost have to have a PhD in aerospace engineering to know which parameters to set. With the technology such as ChatGPT, I mean, in the future you can actually say, hey, Fluent, run a external aerodynamic simulation over a Boeing 747 plane, and it will figure out for that particular case what are the Fluent settings to use and automatically set it. I mean, that could be absolutely huge.
What do you think about that idea, Brian? What do you think this will do to simulation usage?
Well, that's interesting, and later on when I talk about some of my own travels and to assess, and where we talked a lot about the democratization of simulation, that's an interesting notion, because one of the challenges has been with simulation adoption is it's still very complex, and often companies have to still sort of hand off their simulation activities to specialists within the companies, or maybe outside firms. So the idea of trying to find a way to uh, make it easier for people to actually figure out what information they need and interpret those results. That's something I think the industry is looking for, or could possibly help with that transition to wider use of simulation. Other companies are taking other approaches. Like ComSol has done this sort of app building a process where you can your simulation specialist can build these. It's like a sort of an automated process to help the other users figure go through these simulations without having to know that level of detail. Having AI do that for you is will also be interesting, although I think um, you know there's still a lot of peculiarities about how ChatGPT specifically works and responds to things. But I think if you were applying this to something like simulation, obviously there would probably be a lot more close work on training those algorithms to give you the right answers.
Yeah, to me, the ChatGPT application in simulation is mainly about, of course, adopting the natural language processing skills of the chatbot into the user interface. So you don't have to know the precise parameters or the precise dialog box you need to manipulate to set up a simulation. You can just talk to the program in a natural language. But it does introduce the idea that it's going to be less precise, because natural language is not as precise as, load case of several pounds or pressure of several parameters and things like that. It's natural language. How would simulation users or simulation programs be able to accommodate the imprecision of natural language? It's something that I cannot predict how it's going to turn out.
Right. And when I've talked to other companies about, other ways they've incorporated AI into their tools, the idea is AI gives you better options to choose from. So, perhaps with natural language processing, you'd still have some amount of sort of looking at what it's telling you to do, and maybe having to sort of choose among best options rather than having it actually just go ahead and run the thing for you when you're not exactly sure what it's going to do.
It's a good question. It may actually turn out to be that we would actually go back and forth with the chatbot, and then thereby arrive at a reasonable decision. Because indeed, that is how people have been using ChatGPT today. It's not just a matter of asking a question and collecting the answer, but they actually tend to go back and forth, sort of like an exchange between the user and the chatbot. So what you're proposing actually make a lot more sense.
Right. You could come to that more, sort of granular or specific solution by interrogating what the AI is telling you, and then having the AI sort of interrogate you back about it too.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Well, on a related topic, let's also go ahead and talk about NVIDIA GTC. It happened online. It didn't happen in person. The last time it happened in person was before the pandemic. Since then, they have been putting on more GTC shows, but it's just that all of them from the COVID period to today has been online. The numbers are impressive. According to NVIDIA, the latest GTC. I'm confusing ChatGPT with GTC now. uh, the latest
Uh,
number for GTC is 250,000 participants. Omniverse, their digital twin housing platform, has been downloaded for 300,000 times. And perhaps the biggest piece of news that came out of the latest one is that Microsoft Azure is going to become the cloud partner for NVIDIA Omniverse. Any thoughts on those?
well, that's a lot of folks and a lot of downloads. I know that, Omniverse has been a huge focus at NVIDIA. In terms of their tech development and in marketing. So they're really putting a lot into this as a collaborative platform for a number of different types of applications. So, but I'll be interested to see, how, a lot of people downloaded it. How are they actually implementing that, in businesses? They have some big some big customer partners that are using this for actual product development and plant design. So I'll be curious to see how scalable that is with other types of companies, and how other folks really want to use it, because I think there's still a lot of confusion and hesitancy around the notion of the metaverse, which is Omniverse is sort of the NVIDIA flavor of metaverse, or this sort of virtual reality platform for doing work.
Right. We sort of previously, perhaps incorrectly, we assumed that there's going to be something called the metaverse where all the vendors will play together. But more and more, it's beginning to look like there are going to be different versions of metaverse, immersive kind of 3D environment. So um, it complicates things more, of course. If you have a digital twin in one metaverse, and how are you going to transport it to another metaverse? Or will you have several digital twins, one for each purpose, existing in different metaverses? So this gets much more complicated than I originally thought it would be.
Hmm.
NVIDIA also announced that they are releasing a series of cloud services called AI Foundation. So they will involve, for example, NeMo language services, that's the natural language processing services, and Picasso image and video processing services, and also domain-specific generative AI applications for intelligent chat and customer support, professional content creation. On top of that, it seems NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang is also equally excited about ChatGPT. He called it the AI herd around the world, and he think of that as the iPhone moment of AI. Of course, that bodes very well for NVIDIA, because they have hardware like DGX 100, which is a GPU accelerated system for AI workloads. Are we really making such a big deal out of ChatGPT? Do you think, aside from the fact that it's buzzing, it's causing a buzz in the consumer level. Do you really think something like that would do something to the professional design simulation market?
I think potentially, but as with most things that are that come out, we do follow, what the classic Gartner hype cycle.
Yeah.
Where we're talking about it a lot. And initially people start looking at it as the solution to every type of thing. So, we're seeing people testing it out for all sorts of different things, but it may not be the tool needed for all of the applications that people are sort of envisioning right now. So I would give it time. AI, obviously, we've been talking about it for a long time. AI in design, we've been talking about for a little while too. So I guess we'll just have to see. This is definitely, far more advanced in terms of language processing than we maybe have seen before. But how that will play out with design, I think maybe a year from now we'll have a better idea of what that looks like.
The topic of AI and also perhaps ChatGPT came up too at Assess conference that you went to. Could you share some things that you discovered there?
That's true. I was at the Assess Initiative conference in Georgia. Assess Initiative is focused on simulation democratization primarily. They're now part of NAFEMS. And actually, I talked specifically about ChatGPT with an attendee there, and he had sort of tinkered with it, and he was asking me about, what does that mean for journalism? And we discussed it a little bit, and he said a thing he had done was he took a very complicated technical paper and had ChatGPT write him a 2-paragraph summary explaining it. And he said, it actually did a pretty good job. So I think there might be some utility there, maybe in our industry, in sort of reading things that are a little bit maybe above our heads, and getting a better idea of how they look. Hopefully, it won't take over writing our articles for us. But one of the things that we also talked about at Assess, for those of you who aren't familiar, Assess has some different sort of focus areas around simulation that they have committees on, and they work up, focus papers and different ways to sort of help the industry adopt more simulation. And those, one focus area is making a business case, for example. One focus area is generative design. So they've actually added a new area called autonomy, where they want to look at how businesses can increase the use of simulation or improve the use of simulation in creating autonomous systems. And I was involved in a lot of those working group discussions, and we talked a bit about the role of AI there, which is in that you have AI and machine learning involved in the end product that you're creating, whether that's an autonomous vehicle or a robotic system or an autonomous software system. But you're also leveraging AI as part of the simulation process, because you might need to create what's referred to as synthetic simulation data. So if you're trying to do millions of hours of simulation on an autonomous vehicle, for example, you can't program every single potential scenario the car will go through, because there's an infinite number of scenarios on some level. So they're using the AI engines to kind of help create the environments in which you test these things. And the metaverse, the NVIDIA Omniverse specifically, are part of that process too, where you're creating entirely virtual environments that are sort of fueled by these AI engines to test the vehicles or other systems, robotic systems, for example, that people are designing. So there was a lot of discussion around that. And we talked quite a bit about AI. We also discussed, just there were some industry trends brought up about simulation. Obviously here at DE, we are interested in how companies are leveraging simulation in their design processes. And there's been a lot of growth in the CAE market in general. At one point, someone brought up was, how do we know if that growth is organic? Is it new companies adopting simulation, or is it just a lot of large companies buying more software licenses? And I don't know that we know for sure exactly what that is. I don't know that I've seen industry data specific to that to show us are more companies doing this, or just more people within the same companies doing this. And it's something that's of intense interest at Assess and also NAFEMS to kind of look at. Where are these new users coming from, and how can we get some of these other companies that maybe aren't invested in this type of technology to use it. So there was some discussion around that as well. And to the basic sort of underlying philosophy of assess about democratizing the access to these tools, and using things like AI to make it easier to use. Can there be too much democratization? In other words, how far do you want non-specialist users to go with trying to use these solvers and addressing some of the questions you have in the course of product development? At what point do you want to draw a line and say, no, actually, we really do need a specialized analyst to do this work? And I think those discussions are going to continue at NAFEMS in May, which is sort of the next big industry event in that space. And the NAFEMS International is going to be in Tampa here in the U.S. For a change this year.
This is the conference where you would be attending, is it true?
Yes, I'll be at NAFEMS in May, so hopefully if anyone listening is going, we can stop by and say hello.
Right, and I will be going to Siemens Realize, that will be held in Vegas, I believe. A lot of people will jump at the chance of going to Vegas, but frankly, it's not my favorite city.
And the desert in June is it could be a bit balmy.
I imagine so. I'd be hunkering down in the air-conditioned hotel, do what I had to do, and then rush back home. About the autonomy topic that you brought up, I do think that the development of self-driving cars has been quite a boon for the simulation software vendors, because car developers like that have no choice but to use simulation, considering the amount of road that the car has to be trained on, and it's just impractical to do it in the physical realm. So, but lately I think NVIDIA has also been pitching the idea of using Omniverse as the training environment for these self-driving cars. They also have, of course, self-driving specific software stacks and hardware stacks like NVIDIA Drive, part of the NVIDIA Drive offering. The license against users question is interesting. You're right, because most of the time when industry reports kind of talk about the growth, they're making that assessment based on the number of licenses sold primarily, but we don't really know how many of these licenses are actually actively being used, do we?
No, we don't, and that's one of that's another issue that came up because it assessed there are vendors there, but it's not like a normal industry event. It's really a sort of a collaborative event for a very small number of highly qualified and very technical attendees, both from the vendor community and also from end user companies. And the vendors always get grilled there about things like interoperability and other issues. And that was something that was brought up about, the old licensing models are in some ways getting in the way of how people use the software. Because people do wind up having to buy licenses and then they just sit, or they don't get used very often. So the vendors are in the spot now where they're trying to adopt more flexible models like cloud access or more on demand, but they
Yep.
That puts some of their entire business model at risk because they're built on selling software licenses. So it'll be a challenging transition, but one I think they almost have to make, especially as different types of people use the software, that they can't just sell a license and then have people sit on it because they're very expensive, and they don't necessarily get it might be hard to sort of make the business case if you're just buying a license for occasional use that it's
That's
worth
the
the
key.
money.
Yeah, that's the key. That's the key. Because in a product development cycle, you reach a certain point where you use simulation very heavily. And then when that phase is passed, you go back to revisions and designing. And that's a phase where you're not using simulation. So it's really difficult to justify keeping a perpetual license for something that you would use, say, 20% of the project life cycle, which is why we have been advocating for. And I think the vendors realize this too, and the users want it too. What they want is actually a kind of a on-demand pay when we need to use it and not pay when we don't have to use it kind of system. And historically, that is not the system. So that's why as an industry, it's so difficult for us to move in that direction. Maybe we can wrap up by talking about some of the stories that we've been working on. We just wrapped up May issue, and that's the issue in which I asked actually one of our good friends, Joe Walsh from Assess Initiative, to sort of pretend that he's a university professor and grade the industry's, how the industry is doing with simulation-driven design. So we will be releasing his assessment and the article in May issue. And I'm also working on a story for the next issue, which has to do with the use of synthetic data in training self-driving cars. So if we are using artificial data, what are the rules that we might put in place to make sure that those artificial data are actually realistic and reliable enough? What are some of the stories that you're working on or assigning to different people?
Well, in May, which is our issue that's focused on simulation, we'll also be taking a look at model-based systems engineering, MBSE, which is another thing that we talked a lot about at Assess. In addition to some of the on-demand compute requirements if you're trying to use cloud-based simulation. And also we've got some cloud, speaking of the cloud, there's also a cloud-based PLM feature we've got coming from one of our writers in that space, Tom Cavan. And then, as you said, we'll be touching some more on some of those automotive and autonomous topics in the June issue, which is focused on automotive. Those are both coming up. If you want something to read right now, we just posted the April issue, which is focused on additive manufacturing. So we've got features there on design for additive, on multi-material printing, support-free 3D printing, and sort of where that works and where it might not work, as well as a nice article that you did as sort of a follow-up to a previous feature on how digital twins are being used to develop next stage nuclear energy plants and how they've been leveraged in some of the fusion experiments that we've seen.
Very good, Brian. Well, considering how many things are on our plates, we should get back to our work days now. So, it's been a pleasure, as always, to chat with you and catch up and trade stories about trade shows and trade ideas about upcoming stories.
Thanks, Kenneth.
All right. Until next time, I'm Kenneth Wong, the Senior Editor for DE 24/7. And Brian, you are?
Brian Albright, Editorial Director at DE 24/7.
See you in the next episode.